Hello, I'm Chuck Wolf, Chief Executive for Charles J. Wolf Associates, LLC. As a motivational speaker and a leadership consultant and executive coach and trainer, I often work with very successful people in their companies. Since many can't afford a professional, I volunteer to host a radio talk show called The Emotion Roadmap, Take the Wheel and Control How You Feel, on a nonprofit community radio station in Bridgeport, Connecticut, WPKN. My reason for doing the show is to share with as many people as possible this wonderful process for helping people manage their own emotions and their relationships with others. My goal is for everyone listening to learn to use the Emotion Roadmap to make life better. As you listen to me, help others, I hope you are also learning. As a Simsbury resident, I'm delighted to be able to make the show available through Simsbury TV. To learn more, go to my website, www.emotionroadmap.com. Thank you for listening and watching. Hi, this is Chuck Wolf. You're listening to WPKN. And I'm going to have a colleague call in just a little bit. The show is called The Emotion Roadmap, Take the Wheel and Control How You Feel. And I'm going to be doing an interview today. Hello, this is Chuck Wolf. Andrew, you on there?
Yeah, actually, I got cut off.
Yeah, that's okay. I no, I've got it now. Anyway, we're on the air live, and I'm just going to say a few words about you and talk a little bit about the show, and then we'll get started with the interview, okay?
All right, great.
Yeah, thank you very much for calling back. Okay,
no problem.
So folks, we're going to be talking to someone that I've got to know a little bit, and some of you may remember that we had a show on almost a year ago, I guess, and it was about this idea of an emotion revolution in the workplace. And those of you that are just tuning in, the show's called The Emotion Roadmap. Take the wheel and control how you feel. Take the wheel and control how you feel. Now, the idea of controlling how you feel is based on some of the work that I've done over the years in this field called emotional intelligence. And some of that work, many of you who listen regularly know I've done with, in conjunction and in support of the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence. The work started with the president of Yale, Peter Salovey, and Jack Mayer, who discovered this really fascinating idea that we have emotional abilities. And those emotional abilities are based on the idea that each of us has the ability to identify how someone else is feeling and to use the emotions that we feel to drive the way we behave and the way we think, the use of emotions, and to understand how emotions work, that emotions follow certain rules, and that if we understand and can label and express our emotions, that we are better able to deal with emotions. And finally, to manage emotions, both our own emotions and the emotions of others. Now, over the time that I've been doing this show, now over 10 years, that we've had lots of wonderful callers call in and get some support and help for challenging situations in their life that have to do with what's happening to them, sometimes at home, but often in the workplace as well. And every once in a while, I like to do an interview with someone who's doing some exciting work in the world, who is trying to make a difference, the way this show makes a difference, in a meaningful way to help people to deal more effectively with their lives in many different places, including the workplace. And one of those individuals I had the good fortune to run into and find out about is a fellow named Andrew Faas, who's on the phone with us today. I'll ask Andrew to tell you a little bit about his background, how he got involved with this work. But he became interested in working with the Center for Emotional Intelligence with Mark Brackett, who is a colleague and friend of mine, who is the director of that center and doing some incredible work, particularly with schools. That's where Mark has done a lot of his work, is with schools and something called his Ruler program, and a series of coaching experiences that help superintendents and principals and teachers and whole school communities really to learn more about how to regulate and understand and label and express and really deal effectively with their own emotions in a setting where the school is sort of the situational context, but everybody within a school system and the school community is learning about how to better manage their own emotions and to have better emotional relationships with others. And there's huge benefits, as you might imagine, in terms of people feeling more strongly about their self-esteem, more feelings of well-being, more socially responsible behavior, better leadership qualities. All kinds of good things are accruing as a result of the work Mark and the Center are doing in schools. And Mark is responsible and had coordinated with Lady Gaga this whole idea of an emotion revolution in the workplace, which, again, if you're a regular listener, you've probably heard a little bit about. And then Andrew got interested in this idea of an emotion revolution in the workplace. And it's very exciting. Partly it's based on some experiences Andrew personally had. I'll ask him to share with you in a moment. And also he has the Andrew Faas, the Faas Foundation, that is also dedicated to improving all kinds of things in the workplace, but particularly safety and security. I think, Andrew, if there's a niche that I think you've really found for yourself and your organization and the work that you want to do and help promote, it's this idea of the safety and security that people in many places today really don't feel. And, with all the layoffs over the years, all the difficult transitions to a global marketplace where companies that had been very successful for numerous years and really didn't change very many things, when the world began to shrink a bit and it became a global marketplace, all of a sudden the psychological contract that workers had with that businesses had with their workers, it just dissipated, and all kinds of layoffs took place. And with the pressure for performance in the marketplace, and with short-term goals overriding long-term strategies, I think it's been really hard for a lot of people in the workplace today, many of whom express this feeling of feeling overly stressed. And it's really interesting. I attend this conference. Actually, I wrote you about this, Andrew. This is called the Consortium for Research on Emotional Intelligence in Organizations. And a couple of Andrew's colleagues, Robin Stern and her colleague Janet, were presenting at that conference, and they showed a little bit about what you've discovered in the workplace is across schools as well, and that the overriding theme, and I'm actually thinking and starting to do some work and development myself on developing programs to address this issue of stress, because it seems like I don't know if it's 100% or 80%, but it's in the high numbers. People are feeling stress across workplaces and schools, and again, I think the programs that you're starting to build and wanting to create are all geared towards this idea that not only do we need people to feel safe, but we also, if we're going to feel stressed, we want it to feel something that Hans Selye years ago, one of the major researchers in the field of stress, said there's different kinds of stress, and one is distress, which is the kind of stress I think a lot of people are feeling, and then there's eustress, eustress, which is this idea of a positive stress, when you feel challenged and engaged, and you know it's going to be hard to get done what you need to get done, but you're loving what you're doing. And you've got a team that you feel is supportive of you, and you're supportive of the team. And it feels different. It's also stressful, but it's in a good way. And so we want more of that kind of stress if it's going to be out there, and less of the distress that so many people feel in the workplace. So with a little bit of just an overview of what we'll be talking about today, I'd just like to say a little bit about the show, especially if there are new listeners tuning in. Again, I'm Chuck Wolf. The show's called The Emotion Roadmap. Take the wheel and control how you feel. And that show, my show, is all about helping you deal with emotional challenges that you might face either at work or at home or in the community somehow. And the idea of using this concept I call an emotion roadmap, which is to think about a situation that you're facing that is challenging, and when you're not feeling the way you want to feel, and you want to change that feeling to something that's more ideal, how do you make that happen? And that's what the show's about. And in wanting to interview you today, Andrew, it's because you want to make people who are feeling insecure and stressed to feel safe and secure and challenged in a positive way. That's what I'm calling eustress. And the idea of trying to create those kind of cultures, to do away with the toxic culture so many people experience today, and to create something far more positive. So with that, let me ask you to just talk a little bit about your story, Andrew, how you got involved with this, and then jump into, where we are today, because we did talk about the Emotion Revolution. It's on podcast if people want to look it up on SoundCloud or iTunes. You can see the interview I did with Andrew some time ago about where you were starting. But now we're at a different point. You've had a chance to look at the data, and you're starting to build some programs, and I'd like to talk about where you see it all going and how others might get involved, and that's sort of the overview of where we're going. So if you could, Andrew, just a little bit about your background and how you got involved with this.
Sure. I got involved around 10 years ago, a decade ago, and it really started with my focus on bullying in the workplace. And I discovered that there was very little written about it. and people, quite frankly, accepted bullying as something that is that's just the way it is, and there's really nothing that could be done to change it. And there's a lot of programs out there in terms of helping people cope with it, but very little in terms of how to eliminate it. But I discovered that the issue is much broader than just bullying, and it deals with the dynamics of an organization or group dynamics. And I became aware of the work that the Yale group was doing on, you referred to it, Emotion Revolution in Schools, that they partnered with Lady Gaga on. And I attended the launch of that initiative, and I found that there were uncanny parallels to how students feel against how employees feel, and with that we partnered and said, well, let's create the Emotion Revolution in the workplace, because it became very evident to me that was the missing ingredient in how organizations operate. And organizations are facing a revolution because people are reacting to the way that they are dealt with, and they're reacting to a very much of a command and control situation.
Well, let me just interrupt for a second and just say that, command and control works well in certain circumstances. I think, coming out of the Depression, everything I read about that was that people were so thankful to have work that pretty much whatever the boss asked them to do, they did. They were just grateful to be able to go someplace during the day and be able to bring home some kind of income stream that helped to feed and clothe and protect their families. And so I think that over time, as people became, more, as time changed, because the command and control, I think, is still pretty much in place in lots of places. But I think this has been a sort of a pushback to it. And today, of course, we're dealing with almost full employment, really, at least in our country. And things are going to change if they haven't already been. There was a movement towards things they called participative management, and then the 90s were all about empowerment. And then, so there's been like this idea that we want to change. But I think the actual impact of seeing the results of the surveys that you conducted with the Yale Center, and how poorly people really are feeling. I mean, all the words that jumped out at me were depressed, were lonely, sad, unappreciated. I mean, there was just so many negatives. And again, I just want to emphasize for everyone who's listening, the idea of the emotion roadmap is when you have an experience of a set of feelings that are not what you want. And who would want those feelings? If you could have whatever feelings you want in the workplace, it certainly wouldn't be those. And so you're trying to create a different set of feelings. And you want to talk about what the sort of vision is for, and then we'll back into what the strategy is to getting there. But what are you hoping people feel as a result of the work you're going to do?
Well, we quite frankly already know that the key to a positive environment is the relationship that the employee has with their superior, or their manager or boss. And the other thing we know is that a constructive, positive relationship does not exist for most employees. And the reason for that is, for the majority of North American employees, the only discussion that they have with their supervisor is during the dreaded by both manager and the employee, annual or semi-annual performance review, or when things go south.
Right.
And there's a variety of reasons for that. Part of it's the ease of being able to convey messages, positive and negative, through technology. But the biggest problem is it's outside of most people's comfort zone to have those kind of discussions. And the overall vision that I've established for the Faas Foundation in terms of helping organizations create psychologically safe, fair, and productive workplaces is where every point of human interaction is positive and constructive. And that's the ideal.
Well, the idea of an emotion roadmap really, I use that a lot, Andrew, and when I actually teach about performance conversations or development conversations, because sometimes, as you point out, they're not necessarily evaluations at end of year. Sometimes they're during the year. Some do them twice a year, some more frequently. But often they're mandated, and it's not a comfortable situation for anyone. But here's just a thought about the way I've approached that in the past is I ask people, when you're going into a performance review, one of the things that you could potentially do that almost nobody does is to plan emotionally how you want that outcome to happen. So you're saying you'd like every situation where people are having conversations about performance to be constructive and positive. And one of the ways I think about that is to plan emotionally how you want to feel going into that conversation, and to plan emotionally how you want the other individual to feel. So when you first start out, and I see these conversations as having three parts. One is like you have an initial moment where you're setting the tone. You have a conversation somewhere in the middle where you're talking about specifics, where you're talking about things that you really like and value and want to see continue, some things that you might want to just see a little bit more of because you like them as well, and then some things maybe you want to change or see less of at least. And so during that part of the conversation, I think the emotions change somewhat. And then also when you're ending the conversation, how do you want to feel? And there's no real template that says exactly what feelings you want, other than you want to set the tone in the beginning for an open and honest feelings, so that the discussion is frank and useful, and at the end somehow to feel walking out the door that both of you are hopeful and confident and appreciative of what just took place. But somewhere in the middle, the feelings are going to be different depending on the seriousness of performance issues. If you've got somebody you really like who's doing really well, those feelings would be different than somebody who's on the verge of being either disciplined or let go. So I don't know if that relates to what you're talking about, but that's the way I think about this. And I think about the way you're wanting to change entire organization cultures is like that on a broader scope.
Exactly. And the approach we're taking is it's very difficult to overlay whether it's a performance management system or a program on emotional intelligence or anti-harassment program or an ethics program on a culture that cannot absorb it, and a culture that is toxic. And the work that we're doing, yes, deals with how individuals feel and why they feel the way they do, but it's more creating a culture and climate where it can be emotional intelligence can be applied, and it has a very positive effect.
Well, let me ask you a question about this, because or at least make a point. Because one of the things that I think happens, and I want to go back to 2 points you just raised. One was you said the critical element in a lot of how people feel is the relationship with the immediate supervisor, and a lot of people aren't feeling great about that. Is that correct?
Well, I'll give you just one statistic on a survey that I did with the foundation did with Mental Health America. 34%, only 34% of employees feel that they can count on their supervisor for support when things go south.
How much? Just 30 or so?
34%.
Wow. So that's saying 66% don't then, right?
Yes.
Huh.
and 70% of North American employees feel that their supervisor is the cause of the unnecessary stress that they face.
Wow. Well,
So it's
I want to ask you a question about this, because here's and also raise a point. One of the things that I'll call in, people will call in and talk about working in a toxic culture, but there may be a leader, or either at a mid-level or even at a senior level, but they can't really change the culture, but they can be that supervisor, that team leader, that manager, or that executive leader who makes the difference for the people below them. I just want to be clear that I believe that. I'm curious if you do too, because I think even within a toxic culture, sometimes you hear people say, you know what, the company I work for, I'm not crazy about the company, but the guy or the woman that is my leader of my team, terrific. Do you agree that that's possible?
absolutely, and I've proven in many situations that it is possible. I come from from grocery and drug retailing. Worked and was a managing partner of Canada's largest drugstore chain, which was a franchise, and we were able to benchmark performance, but more important, why performance in one store was different than another store, like stores. And we found that the key was the relationship that the franchisee had with their stakeholders. And it wasn't just the employees; it was the relationship they had with their employees. But that was also consistent with the relationship they had with their customers, their vendors, and the regulators. And it provided for us, a very compelling business case to introduce emotional intelligence into those organizations.
So
I also when I give talks, I get this question all the time. Yeah, it's great theoretically, but I can't apply this in my own business. And I often say to somebody, well, do you have anybody working for you? And in most cases, they do. I said, well, why can't you be a role model? So don't use it as an excuse, the culture as an excuse not to individually do it in the area that you're responsible for.
Well, I'm glad you're making those points, and I want to talk about the characteristics that show up for a supportive supervisor. I know that sometimes people feel like when you say the words emotional intelligence, it sounds sort of theoretical or soft somehow, and it's just about being nice. And to me, and I know you as well, it's so much more than that. And I want to take a deeper dive into that for a moment. But I also want to make the point that even in a culture where the organization, profit or nonprofit, doesn't matter, is really thriving, and it's a very safe and it's supportive, and it's sort of a culture where people feel comfortable taking risk, and they're not worried about failure because they know that they learn from failure, but they feel great about showing up and going to work because of the team that they belong to and the supervisors they have. But every once in a while, even in those companies, you might have a supervisor that's in that category that we were talking about a moment ago, where they feel like the people that work for that particular supervisor, even in this really, really sort of excellent culture, people are feeling for that particular supervisor really unsupported, disrespected, unappreciated, and they're feeling stressed, and they're in that category of 66% that don't feel like their supervisor would support them, and some 70% or so feel like the supervisor is the cause of a lot of their stress. So even with inside excellent cultures, you may have people like that. Would you agree?
I do, and I've got a very strong position on that. It's up to senior leadership to make sure that they've got their ear to the ground and they flush out those behaviors, and sending the message: either you change or you're going to be changed.
I think
we'll help you change, but at the end of the day, you've got to change.
Well, you have a really interesting story from your personal experience. And I know we talked about this in the other interview, but I think it sort of be kind of neat to tell it here. This is a story about how you had a mentor and a leader that you work for, and he called you in and asked you about this person that was doing some things that he wasn't crazy about. You want to share that story?
Yeah,
You know which one I'm talking about?
sure,
Yeah, okay.
sure. Yeah, I was 26 years old at the time, and I was the youngest vice president of Loblaw Companies Limited, which is Canada's largest food retailer. And the executive vice president, a guy named Bob McCutcheon, came in and into my office, stoked up a pipe. They allowed smoking back then, and described, asked me, said, I want to talk to you about a problem I have. And he laid out the problem with a young manager who was doing this, that, and the other thing. Didn't use the word bullying, but that's in essence what he meant. And he said, I'm totally perplexed as to what to do. So I thought, well, I better give him a good answer here. And I said, well, Bob, I'm part of the SOP. And he took a long drag from his pipe and said, well, son, you're the SOB I'm talking about. all I could say to that was, oh.
And so began your journey that led you here, huh?
Yeah, and it began almost instantaneously, because he didn't stop there. He said, listen, I'm telling you this, but have your people tell you this. Go talk to them. And they're not going to spill their guts, in the first instance. But you need to understand how they feel and why they feel the way they do. So go in and talk to them about the work that they do, the relationships they have at work, i.e. the relationship they have with you and other people that they work with, and how they feel about the organization, but also get from them why they feel the way they do. And it took a little while for people to feel comfortable opening up. But it's something that I've applied personally, and I've asked people that report to me who have responsibility for others to do exactly the same thing going into the relationship and throughout the relationship. And if people do that and understand emotions, it eliminates the disruptive stressors, or my label for it is unnecessary stress factors.
So it's interesting, Andrew. So, from that experience, coming to know you later on in life, and some other things that happened that were problematic, you developed this passion. But I think one of the reasons I thought to ask you this question right here, right now, is because I thought, as people are listening to this, there are a lot of people that heard what you just said about, you can be the role model. You get questions about, well, my company doesn't really support that, my manager isn't like that, etc. But you could be the person that you'd want to work for. You could be that role model, that shining example of what we're talking about. And so somehow, from hearing that you were doing some bullying behaviors, maybe described differently, but and a chance to start to talk to people over your journey, you've learned some of the things and some of the lessons about how to be successful in different ways. Because I got to say that, being the youngest vice president in that company at 26 years old, some other people might have said, you know what, I'm going to fake it maybe and not really change, because look at what I'm doing. Look at how successful I'm being in the way that I'm operating now. And yet you really heard something meaningful and got something of value from that. And you began the journey to change to something that was far more supportive, and the kind of what we're talking about, emotionally intelligent leader that you're now hoping that you can somehow serve, and your foundation can serve as a role model for creating more and more people like that. So tell us a bit about some of the lessons maybe that you've learned that helped to create this, this emotionally intelligent leadership, and why others may want to do this who are hearing this but not feeling it yet. And I think it's sort of inspirational to think about what you heard and how far you've come in terms of what you've turned around in your own self, and how you're now wanting to share that. So you could tell a little bit about the lessons you learned and what you're hoping people actually can do and be like, and if you could share some things that might help people, want to do that, and some ways that maybe you learned how to do that.
Well, what I learned, and the biggest thing I learned, is people want to be led versus controlled. And we talk about the command and control, and yes, it's there and is necessary in most environments. But command and control does not mean abuse, and does not mean that people do not have a freedom of expression. And the other thing I've learned is by getting people to talk to each other, having civil dialogue, open, honest, and direct discussions, eliminates a lot of ambiguity that's out there in the relationship, eliminates surprises in terms of when things go wrong. Oh my God, why wasn't I aware of this? And it eliminates excuses on the part of employees who aren't delivering. And the key is, it's not an algorithm or a formula that people have to go through. It's just building a respectful relationship that's based on a simple ethic of reciprocity, and it works. It works. The other thing that I've learned is that it's not a human resource issue per se. And when you're talking about emotional intelligence, and the application of emotional intelligence, the reason that it hasn't worked in most organizations is that it's viewed as kind of warm and fuzzy and a human resource program. I've viewed it all along as culture is the way an organization operates and conducts themselves with all stakeholders. And that is so key because what happens in most organizations when they introduce something like emotional intelligence or harassment training, anti-harassment training, is they plaster it all over the walls, they plaster the vision all over the walls, and it's meaningless. Eyes gloss over when people go through it. And this has to be simply the way an organization operates in every aspect of doing business.
So it's sort of like some lessons you've learned now that take this out of the human resource department and put it in the hands of the leaders. I remember, I think it was Peter Drucker that said, "Culture will eat strategy for breakfast every time," and culture does drive performance. So I'd like to make the case for those who might be listening who are leaders of companies that this idea of being nicer to others, I mean, that's fine, but it's more about being smart about what you want to create. And if you want to create an environment where you have an unusual culture whereby people feel excited, engaged, respected, appreciated, valued, understood, and cared about, that you're going to get the kind of performance that your competitors can achieve if their culture is more toxic, like most cultures seem to be these days. So I think is some of the research and some of the findings from what you're discovering with the Yale Center supportive of that notion?
Totally and absolutely. And a related study that we've done with the foundation has done with Mental Health America validates it in spades.
So you actually get performance and productivity from cultures where people feel like it's a safe and it's effective culture and workplace, and of course where you have supervisors that understand the importance. Yeah, I think it's. I got to say, I've done a lot leadership development work for 40 years now or so, and the role of leaders is challenging. It's not simple to go from command and control. I mean, I heard what you said, that one of the lessons you learned is like command and control doesn't have to mean, it doesn't have to be abusive. And what people really want is to be led. And so, well, I have some thoughts about that. I'd like to hear what you say, but also I'd like to just share with people that when someone first takes over the role of becoming a leader, it's really challenging to figure out how to be somebody who can ask people to do things and get things done in a quality way, on time, and on budget, and hold them accountable. And we can't just assume that people have that skill set without being mentored and coached and trained somehow.
Well, one thing that I promote, and when I mentor somebody in a leadership position, before you take any kind of program relative to emotional intelligence or how to motivate people, the first thing you have to do is create the conditions whereby it's going to be successful. And there are 3 conditions. One is trust. And if you don't create an environment where there is trust, nothing you do will work. You may be able to get some short-term results, through demanding, but if people don't trust you, by extension, they don't trust the organization, and it's very unlikely that they're going to perform in the longer term the way you want them to. Relative to performance, the second condition is creating a sense of purpose. So people don't understand why they're doing something and why they're doing it the way they're doing it. It's very unlikely that you're going to get the level of performance that you should expect. You certainly will not get innovation and creativity. So they may perform, under an industrial engineered manner to get the task done, but they won't give you that extra. And that extra is innovation and creativity. And then the third one is people have to have a sense, and there has to be a sense of efficacy. That's efficiency and effectiveness. And if those conditions are in place, it's a lot easier for even the toughest, hardest nosed leader to even behave in a tough, hard-nosed manner. But people, if they trust them and they feel that they are contributing and that there's a sense of purpose, and they believe that they can contribute to the group and individual performance, they've got it made.
So that's sort of like the foundation, if you will, that you can build upon. So it's trust,
that's the foundation.
Purpose, and efficiency, effectiveness. Sort of are those kind of the 3?
The word is efficacy.
Efficacy. Okay.
Yeah.
They feel like they have some control over what they're doing.
Yeah.
So
and I may have told this story in the last one, but I use it all the time because I believe it says it all.
Okay.
President Kennedy in '62 visited Cape Canaveral, and he went around and he was asking various people as to what do you do, and most of them are rocket scientists. So he got some very technical answers. He ran into the janitor, and the janitor said, "Well, Mr. President, I'm here to help send a man to the moon and bring him back safely." And wow, if we could get every employee to come up with that kind of an answer, the GDP would be over the top. So we've got a productivity crisis in North America, Canada, and the U.S. And I believe firmly, based on the work I've done, the research I've done, but more importantly, how I've applied it, that is the key to performance.
Interesting. So it's the purpose. It's that driven mission. I actually have over the years as a leadership consultant, I've had chances to work in organizations that have started with very little trust because they had that autocratic command control group of leaders that didn't allow for anybody to disagree with them. And when someone had a different idea, even if it was a good idea, if it wasn't coming from the senior team, the person was dismissed. Sometimes just dismissed verbally in a meeting. Sometimes actually let go if they continued to do it. So when a new team came in, I remember this was with a large convention center, hotel property in the southeast of the United States. They asked me to come in and help them to create this trust. And I said, well, you can't just say trust me, because people's experience was that the last group of leaders that had been in here said trust me, and they are not going to believe you, because why would they, given their history with other leaders who said the same words as you're saying? I think you need to have some evidence, some way of creating credibility. And so we actually engaged in what you're talking about, which was this creation of purpose. And the way we attacked it was we went after it, and we did all kinds of slices of. It's a little technical, so I won't take a deep dive, but just to say that we had lots of people included, from the bellmen, the housekeepers, the people that serve the food, all the way up to the senior team leaders in this property. And the goal was, when they settled on the vision, was that we want to have the best possible customer experience. So when people come and visit with us, they feel entertained, they feel like they've had the best meal they've ever had, that the service was incredible, and that everybody cared about them, welcomed them, and made them feel really important. And those were the feelings we went after, and the vision that we had. And everything changed, and the culture changed, and it, sometimes vision and culture efforts last years, but this was done in about 6 to 9 months. By 9 months, they were really feeling like they'd achieved their goals. But it was sort of with the same focus you're talking about, in terms of trying to help to build a trust base where there was none, and to try and build it based on people coming together and jointly forming this vision, as opposed to somebody coming in and saying, this is what our vision is going to be. So I don't know if that's helpful, but there's some real experience around that.
Yes. And the company I often use as an example for that kind of culture is Ace Hardware. And ask the listeners to look it up. It's a lot of material on them on the web, but they very much have that type of culture, and it's translated into a very, very a wonderful success story.
What are some of the features that they'll find if they look it up?
Well, what they'll find is, number one, it's the customer experience that you talked about. And so the purpose is to create that experience for the customer. And they translated it, codified it into concrete things that employees at every level in the organization follows consistently.
It's interesting. And another one that jumps out at me is Costco. I don't know what your experience is with Costco, but
yes.
You would agree?
I definitely would agree.
I remember reading in the Wall Street Journal one day that the analysts that rate all these public companies, some group of analysts had downgraded Costco because they gave too much money to their employees in terms of benefits and salary. They overpaid them, and they thought they can't sustain that. And yet Costco seems to have created the culture where customers get incredible support. I mean, the return policy is unbelievable as far as if you're not satisfied with something, how they treat you. But also, I find that most of the time when I go into a Costco, that the people there really seem to be enjoying themselves for the most part. And they're very nice, and they're very pleasant, and they're very helpful. And part of that comes, I believe, from giving people what they need to have a satisfactory and a comfortable life. I find that, it's interesting about, what makes somebody successful in life. Is it how much money you make? Is it how many material acquisitions you accumulate over your lifetime? It seems to me it's more about what is the life you're living, and who are you surrounded by, and what are the relationships like, and do you have a lot of love and support and appreciation in your life for yourself and you for others? And it seems to me those are the happiest people. So it's sort of interesting how you define that. I'd also like to talk a little bit about trust, because I'm curious about, what have you found in terms of your ability, or what are you thinking about how to help organizations create trust in the workplace? Because people start at very different places with trust. Some, will want to trust you right away, and others not so much.
Well, my advice is skip the words, live it.
Ah, good.
And I'll give you an example. Again, fairly early in my career, in the first operating role I had, I ran the wholesale division, which included physical distribution. And what I did, I started out by having town hall meetings across the 17 branches across the country, and met with every shift in physical distribution. And we established a value exchange where we said, okay, here's what we expect from you, the employees, both in terms of behavioral norms and tactical and performance. We tested that for reasonableness by asking them, okay, so if we expect this from you, what do you expect from me and the organization to be able to deliver on that? Once we got that, once that became and agreed on, that became our covenant. Number of months later, I went into a facility, and I was in town on another matter, and I thought I'd drop into the facility, and it was outside of the quarterly town hall meetings. Oh, sorry, I just jumped back in. One of the things that they asked of us, or expected from us, was clean bathrooms and clean cafeteria. So that was an easy one. I said, done. But with one of the facilities, I went and had a visit that was not scheduled. First thing I did is I had to go to the washroom, went into the washroom, and it was a pigsty. Filthy. So I went to the plant manager's office, and I asked him, I said, could you arrange to have a bucket of water, Lysol, Windex, paper towels, a mop, sponges, da-da-da-da-da-da. And he started to ask me, well, why do I want that? And I said, well, Bruce, just humor me for the moment. So in comes the guy with the bucket and all of the cleaning supplies, and I took my Armani jacket off and said, follow me to Bruce, the plant manager, and the guy who brought the stuff, and went into the washroom. And all eyes were on us. So once we got to the washroom, I said, Bruce, I'll do the toilets, you do the urinals, and to the guy who brought the stuff in, I said, you supervise. So we cleaned.
Yeah.
As we're walking out, I said, is it necessary for us to do the others? Bruce said, no, I think you made your point. but that got around the entire network in a flash.
Well, that I got to say, Andrew, that gives life to the words and meaning to the words. You got to get your hands dirty.
But exactly. But the story doesn't end there, because I wanted this to be a learning lesson.
Yeah.
And I said, I'm going to come back in 2 weeks, and I'm not even going to check to see whether the washrooms and the cafeteria are clean. I'm just going to assume they are. But I want to have a meeting, an all hands meeting. And I started off by apologizing on behalf of management for not delivering on their expectation of us. But I said to them, I also have to challenge you. You're not delivering on the expectation I have and the organization has of you to call us out when we're not delivering? Why did I have to find out this way? And this goes two ways. If you're not delivering on our expectations, you're going to hear from us very directly.
That's a great that's a great story.
We need to hear the same thing. And and I'm often asked to describe, what is emotional intelligence, and it's such an easy concept, but it's not words. And when you talk about the word trust, you don't go say, believe me or trust me. What you do is create the conditions whereby, or actually more importantly, you live it.
That's great.
People see in your actions and also your words, obviously. Words other than trust me.
Well, that's great, and I realize that it's been a fascinating 50 minutes or so. But anyway, I'd like to just ask you to talk a little bit about where you're going next in terms of next steps. So we have about 5 minutes left, and I know that you're working with the center and you're trying to create some programs. Are the programs coming from the Faas Foundation in conjunction with the center? Or are you doing things on your own?
No,
go ahead.
Actually, we're working in collaboration with Mental Health America.
Okay.
And we're also working with a major multi-geographic organization, U.S.-based, but they're an international organization, on introducing programs where we can create emotionally intelligent, psychologically safe, fair, and productive work environments.
So if people want to know more about it, Andrew, and they want to get engaged with you somehow, and I guess look up FaasFoundation.org. Is that what they do? Or
actually, if you can look it up under my name, AndrewFaas.com, and that will link you to a blog I do three times a week, at least 3 times a week. And it also it will link you to the foundation site and tell you about the work that we're doing with these organizations. So
Andrew spelled like it sounds, but Faas is Faas, right?
That's right.
Okay. So if they go to AndrewFaas.com, then you'll get information about what's going on currently. You can keep up to date. And you can, I guess, stay in touch if you want, and then there's ways to communicate with you there. Is that correct?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Are you gonna now just the term emotion revolution? You're staying with that, and are the outcomes at some point like 1 to 3 to 5 years? I mean, do you have timetables for what you're hoping to achieve?
Well, actually, what we're hoping to achieve goes beyond the schools and the workplaces. It's getting people to be able to be engaged in a more positive and constructive dialogue. So if we can create emotionally intelligent schools through Yale's Ruler program or other programs that are out there, create emotionally intelligent workplaces, the next frontier is creating emotionally intelligent communities.
Oh, that's awesome.
And it's what I mentioned before in terms of what's our really ultimate goal is to have every point of human interaction be positive and constructive.
It's an amazing goal and extremely meaningful. We wish you tremendous success with it. If in this work at the station I can be helpful in some way, I'd like to help you.
Well, thank you.
Outside of it, if there's something that we can collaborate on, I'd be thrilled to work in a venture like that. It's one of those things where I don't retire because I like getting involved with certain things that I think are really meaningful and that I would enjoy. And your challenge and your excitement and your passion about your goal is one I hope that everybody wants to embrace, Andrew.
Well, I thank you, and I will definitely take you up on that offer. And again, it's so important, particularly in the environment in which we live today, where there's so much animosity and hate and lack of constructive and positive dialogue. And people are hungry for it.
I agree.
And one word that you really jumped out at me in your introduction, and I think it's the biggest issue that people are facing today, is they're lonely.
Right. Right.
And the loneliness has created the other negative emotions. And they're lonely because the relationships that should be there aren't there. And if there's one thing that I think we're going to be doing is creating healthier relationships, whether it's with your spouse or children or friends or co-workers or boss or fellow citizens. It's so desperately needed today.
Well, I want to thank you, Andrew, for your time today and for all the good work you're doing for the community, for the world, really, it sounds like, and wish you much success. Thanks very much for being on. I'm going to close now because I have to say goodbye to my listeners. I want to thank everybody for listening and wish you well. I'll be back. Again, this is Chuck Wolf. You've been listening to the Emotion Roadmap. Take the wheel and control how you feel, and you just learned how Andrew Faas is doing that. So thanks again, Andrew, and thanks everybody for listening. We'll be back for the first 2 weeks in next month. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.
Funding for Simsbury Community Television is provided in part by contributions from viewers like you. Thank you.